I started having horrible nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear the sound of a faint laughter or whispering. At first,
Nightmare Files.
when I was 12 years old, we lived in a really old house. It was at least 200 years old, and there were rumors that it was haunted. One night, as I was lying in bed, my mother came into my room. At least I thought it was my mother. The room was dark and the only light was coming from the hallway. Instead of saying goodnight, she started to tell me a weird and disturbing story about how a demon once came to a 12-year-old girl. She said the demon came at night, crawled up next to the girl and began growling in her left ear. She told me that the girl said a prayer over and over, and the demon eventually went away. I remember just laying there, looking at her, wondering why she was telling me this story, especially right before I went to sleep. She was really freaking me out, honestly. Eventually, she finished the story and got up, and she left without saying anything more. I laid there in the darkness, trying to figure out why my mom would say those things. I tried to get it out of my mind and concentrated on getting comfortable and falling asleep. I heard the noise in my left ear. I couldn't tell if the sound was human or animal. It was a growling sound that left me terrified. I was too afraid to move. I was too afraid to breathe. I was paralyzed by fear. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid of what might have happened. At that moment, I thought of a prayer and started reciting it in my head. I was too terrified to say anything aloud. The growling continued for what felt like an eternity. Then suddenly it stopped. I lay there listening for any other sounds, but all I could hear was an eerie silence. I was awake all night until the sun came up. The next morning, I asked my mother about the story she told me. She claimed she knew nothing about it. She said she had never come into my room the previous night. What she said scared me even more than the growling itself. She said, "That wasn't me. Why would I tell you such a horrible story? Why would I scare you like that before bedtime?" To this day, I still cannot come up with an explanation. I believe that whoever or whatever it was that came into my room that night, it was not my mother. I think it was her doppelganger or a protective spirit disguised as her, trying to warn me of what was about to happen, trying to tell me how to save myself from a possible demon that was about to come for me. Or whoever it was, thank you. When I was 7 years old, I started having intense nightmares. I would wake up every night drenched in sweat with my heart beating fast. Most of the time, I could never remember the dreams or what had scared me so much. I only remembered one nightmare, but it seemed to be recurring over and over. In the dream, I found myself standing in a deep pit at the bottom of a muddy hill. My family were perched at the top of the hill, looking down at me. Their eyes were black and hollow looking. When I would look down, I could see the mud beneath my feet boiling and bubbling. Then something began crawling out of the mud. I tried to scream, but nothing would come out. I tried to climb up the hill, but I kept losing my grip and slipping and sliding back down into the pit. Eventually, I felt my body go very stiff and I was unable to move. My breathing stopped. I felt like I had died. That's when I would wake up. I couldn't move my arms or legs. It felt like someone was holding me down. It was dark and I couldn't hear anything. Just a deep silence. Then I heard the breathing. It wasn't my breathing, it was deep, wheezing, guttural sounds. I've never heard anything like this before. As I lay there in my bed, my body frozen and unable to move. I saw something lurking in the darkness that horrified me. I can only describe it as a demon. It was a small, hairy figure with wide, evil eyes that glowed red as it stared at me. It was grinning at me with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. It knew I was awake. That grotesque face will be burned in my head until I die. I closed my eyes and began screaming. I couldn't move a muscle. All I could do was scream. All of a sudden, my mother burst into my room, and when she flicked the switch to turn the lights on, the light bulb exploded. When I opened my eyes, there was nothing there. The demon was gone. My mom asked me what was wrong. I told her what I had seen. I spent a few months sleeping in her room until I felt safe enough to go back into my room. Even today, whenever I think about this incident, I still get chills. And I have to take a minute to compose myself. I honestly don't know what that was. I grew up in a very strict religious household. As I got older, I began to struggle with my faith in God. When I was a teenager, I became fascinated with the occult. I came to the conclusion that the best way to prove to myself that God existed was to see if demons existed. I began collecting books about witchcraft and demonology. Looking back now, I realize how foolish I was. I didn't understand what I was getting myself into. I began reading these books and actively trying to invite demons into my life. I would read passages from the books out loud, reciting long strings of demonic names. I would draw satanic symbols on the walls and floor of my bedroom, trying to cast and summoning spells. The demons didn't come to me all of a sudden. They came gradually, insidiously working their way into my life. I hardly noticed it was happening until it was already too late. I started having horrible nightmares. I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear the sound of a faint laughter or whispering. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Then things started getting more intense. Sometimes, I would wake up paralyzed. Sometimes, I would feel my bed moving. Sometimes, I would find all my sheets lying on the floor, sticky. My personality began to change. I was tired all the time. I became angry and irritable. I was distant and withdrawn. My family started to notice all these changes in me, and my parents brought me to a psychologist, but he couldn't find anything wrong with me. So late one night, I was awoken by the full moon shining on my face. I felt very strange, as if the world was somehow disjointed, and I was disconnected from it. I felt like I was floating in a vacuum. That's when I looked down and realized that my body was floating above my bed. All of a sudden, I felt something grab me by my feet and start violently shaking me like a rag doll. I was being whipped back and forth. I saw one side of the room and then the other flash right before my eyes. I was terrified and something was trying to kill me or tear me away from this world. Eventually, whatever it was stopped shaking me, and I felt myself being pressed up against the ceiling, as it was trying to crush me. Then suddenly, I was slammed down on the bed. I felt something heavy on my chest pressing down on me. It was as if some invisible weight was pushing me down, and it was getting heavier and heavier. I was paralyzed and couldn't catch my breath. I remember thinking that this is just a dream. There's no way any of this is actually happening. Then I heard a sound I would never forget as long as I live. I heard the sound of the bed creaking. I was sinking into the bed, and the sound of the bed warping under the increasing weight was real. This was really happening. In a frenzy of fear, I burst out of the bed and ran out of my room. I went to my mom's room and woke her up. I was wide-eyed with fear and hyperventilating. She eventually calmed me down and began asking questions. I told her what had happened, but she laughed it off and told me I could stay with her for the night. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I went back to my room and gathered up all the occult books and materials. Then I took them outside, dumped them in the metal garbage can, and burned them. I cleaned all the symbols off my bedroom walls, and I never slept in that room again. Nothing like that ever happened to me again. I think whatever demonic force it was had their one chance, but they failed. And they never bothered me again. So do I believe in God now? I'm still not too sure, but I do know that there are malicious, evil entities in this world, and if you invite them in, they'll gladly come. One evening, I was looking for an internet cafe because I needed to send a few emails. I spotted one in an old building. The sign said it was on the 6th floor. When I walked through the entrance, there was a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the call button, and when the doors opened, I stepped inside. In a lot of Asian countries, many buildings do not have a 4th floor. The number 4 is considered bad luck because the word 4 sounds almost the same as the word for death. When it stopped and the doors opened, I was about to step out when I realized that something was wrong. The hallway was in total darkness. By the light emanting from the elevator, I could make out a random piece of furniture covered with white cloth. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I thought I might have gotten off on the wrong floor, so I checked the buttons, but none of them were lit up. There was nothing to indicate which floor I was on. Just then, I noticed something moving at the end of the darkened hallway. I couldn't quite make out what it was, but it looked like a person dressed in some type of gown. The figure was moving slowly down the hallway towards the elevator. It creeped me out, and in a panic, I started pressing the closed door button. All of a sudden, the light in the elevator flickered and turned off. I was plunged into the pitch darkness. I was so freaked out I almost wet myself. Just as I was about to lose it completely, the lights flickered back on. The doors closed. The elevator jolted back to life and began to ascend again. I breathed a sigh of relief. When the doors opened this time, I was at the internet cafe. I went over to the counter and told the girl who worked there and what had happened. As she listened, her face grew pale. She said that some of the customers and a few of her coworkers had experienced the same thing. She had never experienced anything herself, but she told me about the history of the building. Apparently, the 4th floor had been a hair salon at one time. It was prospering and doing pretty good until one of the women who worked there killed herself in the salon. Nobody knew the reason why. The salon continued to operate, but they were plagued by weird and inexplainable events. Sometimes when customers were having their hair washed, the water would turn as red as blood. Other people claimed that when they looked in the mirror, they would catch glimpses of a ghostly figure standing behind them. When they turned around, there would be no one there. Because of these events, the salon developed a bad reputation and began to lose customers. Eventually, they were forced to close down. The building's owner tried to rent the 4th floor out to other businesses, but when they found out what had happened, nobody would take it. Finally, the owner reduced the price to nearly nothing, and it was rented by a businessman who planned to open a stationery supply store. However, when they tried to do some renovations on the floor, there was a series of mysterious accidents. The workmen's tools would sometimes disappear, only to be found in strange places. A large mirror suddenly shattered when nobody was near it, and the workman had his hand crushed when the elevator closed unexpectedly. Eventually, the workmen were so spooked that they refused to continue. The building's owner gave up trying to rent the 4th floor out and just shut it down. He had the buttons in the elevator replaced, and it was reprogrammed that nobody could go on the 4th floor. At least that's what's supposed to happen. For some reason, when people took the elevator, it would sometimes stop on the 4th floor, and when the doors opened, some people would see a figure coming toward them in the darkness. I honestly still don't know what that was.
Files.